And welcome back to those of you who joined us for the sessions this morning, and welcome to those of you who are joining us for the first time today. So this is the third session of our 2025 annual SQE conference, and in this session we'll be looking specifically at qualifying work experience, or QWE as we usually refer to it. And we'll be looking in particular at how to ensure a positive candidate experience when undertaking QWE. I'm Maxine Moore and I'm Head of Education and Training at the SRA, and I'm joined by my colleague Richard Williams, who, as I always say, is our qualifying work experience expert. And I'm also very pleased to be joined by a number of people who are going to talk about how QWE works in real life. So today we've got Matt Doyle, who is Senior Legal Counsel at Vodafone, and Samantha Hope, who is Senior Emerging Talent Manager from Shoosmiths. And they're going to talk about how to provide qualifying work experience from an employer's perspective. And then on the other side of the coin, we also have Kieran Ung, who is Legal Counsel at Vodafone. And Kieran's going to talk to us about his experience of both working full-time at Vodafone whilst also studying part-time and completing his qualifying work experience. But just before we start, I've got a few housekeeping things that I just need to go through with you. Those of you who were on the sessions this morning will know that we want this session to be as interactive as possible. So it is possible to submit questions. If you want to do so, there is a link below the video, so please do so. You can include your name if you wish to, but you can also ask us questions anonymously. It's entirely up to you. We will try and answer as many of your questions as we can as we go through the session or at the end of the session, but just to be open with you, we may not be able to answer all of them. It will depend how many we get in and the time that we have available. The other thing I would just say about the questions is we do quite often get a fair few number of very individual questions asked about qualifying work experience when we do these sessions. So we won't be able to answer very specific and individual questions, but hopefully the generic information that we provide today will be able to help you to answer your individual queries. And then the final thing just to say is that this stream will be available on Catch Up, so please feel free to share it with your colleagues or to dip back into it at the end if you choose to. So we've got quite a lot to get through today, so I'm going to get started, and I'm going to start first of all with Richard, who's going to give us just a reminder about the SRA's regulatory requirements for QWE. So Richard, qualifying work experience, it's the mandatory period of work experience that everybody, with the exception of qualified lawyers, must take before they can qualify as a solicitor. So can you start by just telling us what counts as qualifying work experience?
Yes, absolutely, Maxine. So in order for a placement or a period of work that's been obtained in an organisation to count as qualifying work experience, it must be a role that has involved the provision of legal services. It must engage some or all of the competencies outlined in the Statement of Solicitor Competence. It needs to be 2 years full-time or a part-time equivalent. It can be gained in no more than 4 organisations, and they don't have to be organisations that we as the SRA regulate. And I know we've had a couple of questions in previous sessions about this, but qualifying work experience can also be gained in England and Wales, but and it does not need to cover English and Welsh law. So we've had a couple of questions around people kind of working overseas, perhaps in Scotland, for example. So as long as your experience is covering the provision of legal services and engages some of the competencies in the Statement of Solicitor Competence, you know, it can count as qualifying work experience. And then finally, a period of qualifying work experience needs to be confirmed by a solicitor or compliance officer for legal practice who we regulate.
Thanks, Richard. And you said it has to be working in legal services. How would somebody know if they're working in legal services? Is it always obvious?
It's not always obvious, and I think kind of our advice is that actually employers and individuals can use the definition of legal activity in the Legal Services Act, which I think is section 12, to help them work out whether a job function or a role involves the provision of legal services. So if you use that definition, it will help you understand whether some or all of the competencies are likely to be engaged in the provision of legal services, and any kind of work that falls within that broad definition is likely to be qualifying work experience. Just a couple of other points on, I suppose, kind of the provision of legal services points. So qualifying work experience must be kind of real life legal work, and by that we mean simulated legal activity won't count towards qualifying work experience. So you could have been a paralegal, trainee, volunteer in a law clinic, law firm, in-house, voluntary sector organisation, for example. The title of your role doesn't matter. The key thing is that the work that you've been doing falls under that umbrella kind of term of legal services.
And something else that you've mentioned a number of times already, Richard, that's really important is getting exposure to the relevant competencies. How will people know whether they've had exposure to the competencies? And a second part to that question, which is something we get asked a lot about, is how many competencies do they have to be exposed to?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and we do get a lot of queries around that. So a really good place to start to understand the competencies, what's involved, what they look like, is our statement of solicitor competence, which can be obtained on our website. Another really good kind of starting point is we have developed a template for individuals to record their qualifying work experience. And what that template does is outline all of the competencies in the statement of solicitor competence. So as an individual, you can take a look at it, you can consider your role, your experience, and then you can think about, actually, do I have any experience that meets one, two, or all of those competencies, and document it. It's also quite a useful tool, I think, as well as for identifying any gaps where you might not have had exposure to competencies. It's not a regulatory requirement that organisations offering qualifying work experience or those looking to qualify through the SQE route use that template. It's there really as a support. In terms of kind of, is there a magic number? Our regulations do not require someone to develop all of the competencies outlined in the statement of solicitor competence for their experienced account. So when we talk about some, I think what we're really talking about is kind of anything more than one. So if you were looking for a minimum number, it would probably be 2. And of course, we won't prescribe which competencies an individual needs to have been exposed to.
Thanks, Richard. Having said that, though, you've said that the minimum number of competencies is at least 2. But this session's about ensuring that candidates have a positive experience during their QWE. Presumably, the more competencies, the better in terms of giving candidates a positive experience and preparing them for a career as a solicitor.
Absolutely, and that 2 figure is really kind of the kind of bare minimum, really. If you go back to the purpose of what qualifying work experience is, it's really about providing an opportunity for people wanting to be a solicitor to be socialised to the skills, knowledge, behaviours, the working environment required of a solicitor. So from that perspective, or a candidate looking to qualify, you really want to get as much exposure to as many competencies as possible. And we know from a lot of our ongoing engagement, actually, that where people do their qualifying work experience, they tend to get exposure to a lot of the competencies outlined under the key headings of the statement of solicitor competence. The other thing to take into account when we're looking at kind of what good looks like in terms of exposure to competences is that actually, candidates will be assessed as part of the SQE assessments on whether they can demonstrate the full range of competencies through the SQE assessments, and they need to pass this, obviously, to be admitted as a solicitor. So, if we're talking about making QWE a really good learning opportunity, exposure to a varied and diverse number of competencies is likely to be beneficial both to you as an organisation offering qualifying work experience, to socialise the solicitor, a potential solicitor, how you work, but also supporting the individual, giving them the best chance to pass the SQE assessments.
Thanks, Richard. And before I move on to our other speakers, the other thing I want to ask you about, again, which is an area we get asked about a lot, is the sign-off process for qualifying work experience. And what I mean by the sign-off process is that confirmation at the end of the period that a candidate needs before they can apply to the SRA for admission. So can you tell us, Richard, how does the sign-off process work from a regulatory perspective? What are the requirements?
Yeah, it's quite clear in our in Regulation 2 of our authorisation of individuals regulations what it is we're requiring of a solicitor or COLP when confirming qualifying work experience. And I think there's sort of 2 or 3 things. Firstly, they are confirming the length of time of the placement that the individual is claiming as qualifying work experience. They're also providing confirmation that they're exposed, that it was legal services, and that the individual had the opportunity to develop and be exposed to some or all of the competencies. And then finally, they're providing details of any character and suitability issues that we should be aware of. If you're offering qualifying work experience, I think a really good top tip that we come across a lot of the time is that actually it's really important to be clear who in your organisation is confirming qualifying work experience from the outset of an individual's kind of placement. And
if there's no solicitor or COLP, Richard, in the organisation where somebody is doing their qualifying work experience, what does that mean? How do they get their qualifying work experience signed off?
Yeah, and we recognise that actually not all organisations offering qualifying work experience will employ a solicitor or COLP. We regulate. So if this is the case, a candidate can get their qualifying work experience confirmed by another solicitor who works outside of the organisation where they gain their qualifying work experience. So, for example, it could be, if you're working perhaps in an in-house setting, this could be a solicitor in a local law firm that is willing to confirm. So, in doing so, that solicitor needs to be aware of a couple of things when confirming qualifying work experience. So they will need to have reviewed the work during the relevant period of work experience that's being claimed, and secondly, they will need to have received feedback from a person or persons supervising the individual's work. So it's confirming qualifying work experience is a really important regulatory step for us. So any solicitor that's confirming qualifying work experience outside of an organisation where it happened really needs to pay attention to those 2 particular criteria.
Thanks, Richard. And we've had a question in actually from somebody about this sort of third-party external sign-off, and the question is that our requirements say that the person who's signing off the work experience has to have had direct experience of the candidate's work. Can you expand a little bit more on what do we mean by direct experience in that situation?
Yeah, it's a question we're often asked. I mean, obviously they're not going to be working in the same organisation as the individual. So I think by direct experience, we are really talking about an opportunity for that third party solicitor, the solicitor outside of the organisation, to have reviewed the work that the individual has done within the organisation where they're obtaining qualifying work experience. So it might be reviewing a portfolio, for example, of the work, or it might be reviewing a learning and development record, which identifies how they've been exposed to the competencies, for example, and the work that was involved in doing that. So again, kind of just a call back to perhaps our templates. If you are an individual in that type of scenario, have a look at our template, because it might be helpful for you to build up that evidence to enable someone to have a look and kind of review the work that you're doing.
Thanks, Richard. Now, the large majority of candidates do have a very positive experience, and those candidates are in regular communication with their employer. The employer is very happy to sign them off at the end of the period of qualifying work experience. We do hear from a very small number of candidates who have a slightly less positive experience because they find that their employers won't sign off their QWE because the employer thinks that the individual is not competent to be a solicitor. What's the situation there from the regulatory perspective? Can an employer in that situation refuse to sign off someone's qualifying work experience?
Okay. So I think really a starting position as a regulator is that we expect solicitors and COLPs to comply with our principles and code of conduct for solicitors, to act honestly, fairly at all times, and not to abuse their position by taking unfair advantage of anyone when confirming qualifying work experience. I suppose that's the kind of overarching principle behind this. That being said, a solicitor can, a solicitor or COLP can state the evidence that they want to see in order to satisfy themselves that they are doing what they need to do in terms of confirming qualifying work experience. But I think, just to be absolutely clear, confirming qualifying work experience does not mean or making a judgment about the individual's competence to practice. This is not the kind of the world of the training principle in perhaps the previous qualification regime. Competence is determined by whether or not the individual passes the SQE. It's not also about judging how well the individual has been trained or the quality of their experience or the standard of their work. It's also not about deciding on an individual's suitability to be admitted to the profession. That's our job. What we want from someone who's confirming qualifying work experience is to tell us if there's anything we should be aware of. So we often get asked kind of, if I confirm someone's qualifying work experience, are they admitted to the profession? And the answer to that is no. The individual would still need to pass the SQE and demonstrate their competence.
And if someone is having a problem getting their QWE signed off, they know they've done it, but they just can't get their employer to sign it off, what should they do?
First step would probably to have a look at our website. We've got lots of really helpful guidance aimed at individuals who might well be in that situation, but also for organisations offering qualifying work experience. But if someone finds themselves in that situation, I think the first step is to make sure they have all the evidence in place to demonstrate that they've met some or all of the competencies. I think then it's really about talking to the solicitor or COLP who is refusing to confirm, to seek clarification on why they are refusing to confirm qualifying work experience. Possibly another option is to think about inviting someone who can help or show someone how you have met or some of the competencies. This could be a line manager, a supervisor, if they're not the person confirming qualifying work experience. You can also think about inviting someone who can possibly act as potentially third party if that kind of relationship is broken down to the point where you might have to think about getting another solicitor. So there's always that option. But before engaging that option, I think it would be helpful to speak to us as the SRA. We have a dedicated QWE helpline for individuals who might well be in this situation, and certainly we can play a role in making sure that solicitors and organisations we regulate are very, very clear on our expectations and our rules and regulations around confirming qualifying work experience.
Thanks, Richard. And we've had a question in from somebody who's asking, once somebody has been signed off and been admitted as a solicitor, does the employer have to employ them as a solicitor?
No, that's not a decision for us as a regulate. That's really a decision for the employer. It's up to them whether they decide to employ an admitted solicitor, employ an individual who has been admitted and passed the SQE, for example, as a solicitor, or continue to employ them in their role that they had before admission. I think, given the kind of focus of this session, I mean, it's good employment practice, I think, and not really a regulatory requirement. But our advice is, if that if an individual isn't going to be employed as an admitted solicitor, then it's really useful and positive to have a good, open, honest conversation about the individual, about whether or not there's a role for them after they qualify as a solicitor. In terms of titles of jobs, etc., again, that's not a matter for us as a regulator. I think the only other point I would flag is that, however, if a firm decides to continue to employ an individual who is qualified through the SQE in a non-solicitor role, for example, as a paralegal, they will still need to comply with our regulatory requirements for solicitors. So, the individual, for example, will require a practicing certificate and will need to comply with their continuing competence obligations.
And I've got one more question for you, Richard, before I turn to our other speakers. It's a question that's come in from somebody who's watching us today, and they're asking about retrospective sign-off. So if someone's left a firm, can they still go back to their old employer and get their qualifying work experience signed off?
Absolutely. Qualifying work experience can involve retrospective periods of work. So there is no kind of backstop to how far we as a regulator require or people can go back to. I think it's important to if you are in a position where you want to claim retrospective qualifying work experience, to be really clear on kind of the role that you had, whether you have any evidence to say you met some of all of the competencies as well. But it's equal. I think from an organisation's perspective, if someone is requesting that a period of retrospective qualifying work experience is confirmed, and it might be beyond the scope of your kind of how long you keep your employment records, then we would expect you to kind of take some reasonable steps to kind of try and confirm it. But if there are no records or no individuals that were working with the person claiming the qualifying work experience around, then it may not be possible to confirm qualifying work experience. And in that situation, you should really explain to the individual why that's the case.
That's great. Thanks very much, Richard. We'll come back to you a little bit later in the session, but for now I'm going to turn to our other speakers. And Matt, I'll start with you and your experiences at Vodafone. So I understand that before the SQE was introduced, you didn't support people through to qualification as a solicitor. So can you tell us how the SQE changed things at Vodafone, and how did it allow you to support your employees through to qualification as a solicitor?
Yes, thanks, Maxine. So I'll just clarify very briefly. Vodafone Group, which is what I'm part of, didn't have the traditional setup of training contracts and so on. Some other Vodafone companies did, like Vodafone UK. In Group, we've typically been more senior, and we have centralized corporate functions. So we're set up a little bit like a mid-sized law firm, maybe. You could look at us like that, but we'd have corporate teams, litigation, competition, privacy, IP, commercial contracts, COSEC, etc. So we hadn't ever sought to be regulated in that sense. I don't think we were set up to run kind of a regulated training contract process. But when the SQE launched, we had some external contractor support from a company called Flex Legal, who then started an initiative called Flex Trainee, which aligned with our diversity and inclusion commitments. And this was helping people who maybe came from less diverse backgrounds obtain access into the legal profession. So through this, we started seeing how simple it could be to support some juniors through the SQE and offer QWE. So we took a Flex Trainee, and they showed us the parameters that they had and that their program had. And it sort of snowballed a little bit from that. We took part in conversations that the SRA were having and the Law Society were running. We started sharing ideas with other in-house organizations around how best to implement. But after that, it sort of became a relatively straightforward process of devising some SQE and QWE parameters. Who could be candidates internally? What would this entail? How would this work alongside our existing HR policies? Where would the budgets come from, and so on? And it's also worth noting, perhaps, that although our initial candidates were fixed headcounts in particular teams, so they were actual resource that was being budgeted by that team, and not your typical floating trainee that you might get in a through a training contract that can easily rotate. We realized that just with a little bit of effort, we could seek to offer various rotations. So utilizing some of the contractor support from Flex Trainee, backfilling with some of our panel firm trainee secondees where possible. Now, I know that's not obviously possible for every organization, but again, the flexibility of the SQE and the fact that we didn't need to be a regulated training provider to provide QWE meant that we could, as a minimum, at least start our program and then start to tackle any issues as they arose.
Thanks, Matt. That's really helpful and hopefully encouraging for other employers who are thinking about whether or not to support their employees through QWE. Richard's already talked a little bit about the supervision role in QWE, and it's obviously very important. So can you tell us what sort of arrangements for supervision you have at Vodafone for people that are doing their QWE?
Yes, yeah. So currently this is an internal program. It's not public facing. It's only something that it's still pretty much in its infancy. So we're only offering it to people who have been within the organisation. And we've had 3 internal candidates become trainees, obtaining their 2 years of QWE. We've had 3 flex trainees on 2-year contracts, and we've had about 3 or 4 others, so trademark attorneys, privacy and compliance specialists, non-English lawyers who've looked to sit the SQE exams. And all of them have been working full-time whilst studying for the SQE part-time. For those who are already established in their role and simply seeking to qualify or add some credibility to their position, they've remained in their team. And whilst the option is there for them to maybe rotate into another team, they're generally continuing with their day-to-day roles. So supervision for what they're doing is not really required. For those candidates who become trainees, our aim really has been to try and wrap our arms around them. And key to that is ensuring that they have a harmonized, fulfilling development experience, whichever team they sit in whilst they're obtaining their QWE. So when we started the program, we tried to give the commitment that there would be at least one secondment into another team. And like I mentioned before, part of that is the difficulty of navigating headcount issues when you've got full-time employees who sit in a particular team. And so we couldn't really promise more. But we soon realized that with the pool of internal trainees, with some of those flex trainees I mentioned about, and the panel firm secondees, we've been able to move towards more of a traditional seat rotation, so allowing 2, 3, 4 moves. But then as a result, that supervision piece, we've sought to ensure that any team taking on a trainee really buys into the program. In many cases, they're going to get some free headcount, win-win. So they need to ensure that they devote time to the development of the trainee. Examples being providing weekly one-to-ones. It's not something that all the teams in our group function would otherwise do. Giving high quality work, providing regular feedback. And prior to the trainee joining the team, I will now meet with the supervisor that's going to look after them on a day-to-day basis and talk to them about the SQE and QWE. What is it? How it works? A lot of the stuff that Richard was going through. And then what the expectations are on them as a supervisor and as a team. And then with the trainees, I'll continue to have monthly one-to-ones, partly in a mentoring role. I think that's really helpful, but also just to check in on how things are, the quality of their work and experience, help them maybe navigate their next move, their next rotation, and also help with ideas on how to raise their profile and generate their advocates, because I think that's really important here, building your network and building your network of advocates. And yeah, also if they felt they had issues that they can't raise directly with their supervisors, then within my role, I'm on hand to support as well.
That's great. Thanks very much, Matt. We'll come back to you again shortly, but for now, I'm just going to move on to talk to Sam. So Sam, you work at Shoosmiths. Can you tell us how QWE works for traditional trainees at Shoosmiths?
Yeah, so So we take on around 30 trainee solicitors a year onto our formal training contract programme. We still call it a training contract. And on that, we do have trainees who have come through the LPC route, but obviously those who are coming through the new SQE route and are looking to do their QWE. So for us, our traditional training contract looks very similar to what it did before SQE, in that trainees still join and they do a 4-seat rotation over 2 years. And although that's not a requirement of QWE anymore, they don't need to get that experience in different areas of law. For us, we still see that as a really valuable opportunity for the trainees to experience and to learn what area of law, you know, is going to be right for them, what they're best suited to, what they enjoy. And getting that exposure through different teams allows them to build up their competence, of course, throughout as well. And as they gain that experience, they're recording their QWE, they're recording their work on a weekly basis into a specific platform that we use both for seat reviews and for them to record their competence. And that means that over the 2-year period of time, they're able to collect that full record that they're then using to evidence their QWE. It's not a document that they just need to do in one go at the end. And the way that we ask them to record that detail is from using the SRA's template form, which Richard already mentioned, but obviously building upon that into our platform and having that as an internal secure platform. And that also gets people ready for after qualification, because that's still a platform that we use for recording reviews and performance records, for example, on an ongoing basis. Doing it that way means that we can align all of our trainee solicitors, so kind of no matter which route they're coming through at the moment, on LPC route or SQE, they're able to utilise that same platform to make sure that they're recording what they're learning. And it also offers them the opportunity to spot for gaps, skills gaps that they might want to develop throughout that time as well.
Thanks, Sam. And you mentioned there that you previously had people under the old LPC scheme as trainees. So when SQE was introduced and you wanted to put people through the SQE system, did you have to make many changes in order to incorporate the SQE into your firm?
Honestly, no, not loads of changes at all. So in terms of the I guess the admin side from our team, from the emerging talent team, is slightly different. We're running 2 different routes and we're making sure that we're meeting the regulators' requirements in terms of experience and making sure people are recording against the right things. So for LPC trainees, we're still looking at the practice skills standard, and for QWE SQE trainees, we're looking at competences. So there are slight differences there, but I think as a national firm, we're set up in a way that allows us to provide that support directly to both the trainees themselves and the support to the teams as well, so that everybody is really clear on what the requirements are. And as part of that, we created our own best practice guidance, both for, again, the trainees themselves and for the managers, so that they are aware of the slight differences in the process. And I guess essentially for the introduction of the SQE, it gives us an opportunity to be more flexible. If people are coming to us with previous experience, if they paralegaled either for us or elsewhere, if they've already gained some of that QWE, it gives us an opportunity to take that into consideration. And we may have done in the past in terms of time to count, but I guess SQE gives a lot more flexibility. It's not to say that we offer that as standard, like it's still really important to us that we're able to offer a really standardized, high quality training experience to our trainees that are coming through, and that there is a standardized sign-off process for those individuals then moving on to qualify in our firm. So I guess a really important part to note from that is, yes, meeting all the regulations are essential, but as a business, we're trying to meet a much higher level of standard. We're really trying to provide a really excellent training experience, positive experience for the candidates and the teams, and we're training people specifically for our firm and what they can bring to us when they qualify. So making it bespoke to us and for other employers who are watching this is really important, I think, to look at it through your own lens of what you want to get out of it, and by creating that best practice guidance internally enabled us to provide that support and really think about those questions about what did we want out of the process.
Thanks, Sam. It's really great to hear you talk about the flexibility that the SQE has brought to your business, and Matt, too, you've mentioned that flexibility that the SQE has brought to the business and to candidates, and I'm really pleased to hear that, because of course that was one of the main objectives of the introduction of the SQE. So great to hear that. Matt, I'm just going to come back to you, and I'm going to come back to a topic that's already come up in this session, and that's around employing people as a solicitor once they've qualified. Now, I know you do support individuals at Vodafone who are already working at Vodafone through their QWE. Do you always guarantee them a role as a solicitor afterwards?
I'd love to say yes, but we created loose parameters for those on our internal program, so that covers things like sponsorship of the course, exam fees, some additional study leave, but we have to be realistic given the practicalities of a company that goes through plenty of reorgs, one that always having to try and keep our shareholders happy, so costs are regularly scrutinized. So we are very upfront at the beginning with our candidates that there is no guarantee of a job on qualification, but there are things that they can do to put themselves in the best position. Ultimately, the onus is going to be on them to perform, but they should really raise their hand and show their capability. So one thing I always try and push is that they need to do more than just the day job. They need to get involved in some of the extracurricular initiatives that maybe sit within the strategy, ensure they build their networks, and as I said before, ensure they have advocates. Because what we will try and do is see that, say, after 12 to 18 months of their QWE, and as they move into the last 6 months, and assuming all has been going well with their exams in the SQE, we'll see whether there's a business case that we can build within the team that they'd like to qualify in for additional resource. And this obviously will be an easier job to do if there's been greater visibility of the trainee during their QWE, with people who are willing to vouch for their ability and their commitment. So we'll really try, and we have succeeded, as Kieran can show, to keep those that we've developed. But it's on them as much as it is us to some extent. From an employer's perspective, I think you need to do all you can to try and keep these people, or to keep trainees, because they understand the business, they know it so well. There's a real sort of commitment and loyalty to the company that supports a candidate from one area of their career through qualifications. So we try our very, very best, but no, we cannot guarantee it.
Thanks, Matt. That's great. And Sam, I want to just come back to you again, talking about supporting paralegals who want to qualify. I know you do that at Shoosmiths, and you have an interesting approach, don't you? So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so it's what we call the NQ Plus pathway. So the idea is that we're looking for somebody to slot into an NQ vacancy plus. We'll give them the training that they need to get there. And essentially, this is a really structured pathway for career progression for people who are typically in paralegal roles, that they could be providing legal services in another way in the business already. So essentially, the easy way to think about it is a promotion route. So we're identifying paralegals who are working in the business, who are high achievers, who have a long-term vision to qualify and remain with the business. And at the same time, we've identified an NQ role within the business. And it may be that we've been unable to fill that NQ role. Perhaps it's in a niche area, it's difficult to fill, or perhaps our trainees aren't necessarily going through and training within that team and therefore not wanting to qualify there. Or it might be even that a role has been advertised externally, maybe at a higher qualified level, and again is proving difficult to recruit to. And so that's where this route was devised from, those two different avenues, both the high achieving paralegals and the roles that might be difficult to fill. And we've brought them together to create the NQ Plus pathway. And so it's entirely business led. So the business has to identify the NQ job first. But that could be an NQ job that's a few years down the line. And then that actually enables us to identify or run a selection process actually in the firm where paralegals with the required experience can then come forwards to apply. So it could be that they have a certain amount of QWE, perhaps they've passed the SQE themselves and they need extra QWE. It's a very bespoke and tailored pathway to the individual who then goes to apply for it. And I think it's a really good opportunity to provide recognition to that individual for their hard work and obviously then offer them the promotion opportunity. And essentially we're offering to top up the experience or the training that they need. So if they have, let's say they've worked in the business for 12 months as a paralegal, but they need then another 12 months QWE and the SQE as well, then we would fully fund them to go and do their SQE training and exams in the same way that we would for a trainee who's on our rotational training contract program. And then we would also promote them to a trainee solicitor role with a trainee solicitor salary, and they would top up the QWE that they need. So let's say that extra 12 months, and then they would have a guaranteed NQ job at the end of that once they've qualified and become admitted. So it's a really lovely pathway to offer. It means that their experience is pretty much all gained within the qualifying team, and so they become a real specialist within that area. And so as a qualified individual, they're typically coming out with 2 years experience within one team, compared to say a trainee who might be qualifying with just 6 months experience in a specific team. There is some degree of flexibility, and sometimes they do rotate to gain additional experience as well. And obviously that's we're looking at the competencies. They record their performance reviews and their competencies, their kind of trainee diary throughout the entire time of their QWE. So they're met with the same standards that we hold to our trainee solicitors on the rotational programme as well, and they have access to the same learning and development resources. So it's a great opportunity to widen access to a career in law for people who may have found it difficult to access an assessment centre, or may for whatever reason not have the grades to come forward to an assessment centre in the first place for certain firms. So yeah, it's a really positive one that I'm really passionate about. But I think it's really a really good point to make, that it's not a programme that we open up to every single person to apply to in the same way that a training contract is a very open application process. This is where we're identifying one particular role, and then people within the business are having to apply to that particular role. But it's not a given route where somebody could say, I'm a paralegal and now I want to qualify via this route. They would have to wait for the role to become available to apply to it.
Thanks, Sam. Kieran, I'm going to come to you now, and thanks very much for waiting so patiently. So Kieran, you were previously a paralegal role at Vodafone, and you recently completed and passed both SQE exams, and actually I know recently been admitted as a solicitor, so congratulations.
Thank you.
And you did your QWE at Vodafone. So can you tell us how you transitioned from that paralegal role to the trainee role?
Yeah, sure thing. So I joined as a contracts paralegal in the brand legal team, and the role was a mixture of traditional IP paralegal work and working on digital transformation projects. After around 18 months, I was able to transition into a permanent paralegal within that team. And then after about a year of that, the SQE route by then was in full force, and something that I wanted to consider offering to an initial cohort. And whilst I was a paralegal, I always made it clear to the company that my ambition was to eventually qualify as a solicitor. And so generally speaking, Vodafone wants people in a paralegal role for at least 18 months before offering the SQE route to them. And so although I was only in the permanent paralegal role for a year, as mentioned, I was known to the company for over 2 years. As Matt referenced earlier, during that time, Vodafone was able to see the consistent quality of my work, and they were confident with the level that I was operating at. So I was very grateful when they decided to offer the SQE route to me and support my studies, and to really focus on allowing me to obtain QWE as a trainee solicitor.
And what would you say worked particularly well for you in terms of a positive experience when you were at Vodafone?
So coming into the legal profession, I always knew that I wanted to qualify in IP. And so training at Vodafone worked really well for me, because for about 13 months of my 2-year training period, I was based within the brand legal team still, with a heavy IP focus. But then during those 13 months, there were also opportunities to work on legal matters in other teams, such as our consumer products and services teams. I spent 5 months on an internal rotation within the company's secretariat team, COSEC team, and a further 6 months was spent on an external secondment to one of our panel firms in private practice. The COSEC rotation was partly due to the fact that I had expressed an interest in how the governance behind a publicly listed company worked. And there was also a strong hope from the business that I would go into that team due to resource demands around the annual reporting season. So similar to seat allocations in private practice, when you do QWE in-house, it can mean being flexible to meet the demands of the business. Beyond the structure, what also really worked for me was that I wasn't treated as just a trainee by the stakeholders or by my team. So I was given responsibility early. I had a lot of direct engagement with the business, with our key stakeholders, and that enabled me to rapidly build my competence and my confidence. Because to the business, I wasn't just a trainee, because they had no previous experience of sort of a training structure like that within group, as Matt mentioned. So to our stakeholders, I was just the legal expert, and I was able to work with a wide variety of qualified solicitors within our legal function. So it really helped me to understand what it means to be an in-house counsel from the outset.
And you mentioned there that you were also seconded out to a law firm as part of your QWE. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that worked?
Yeah, so it was a direct swap with a trainee from one of our panel firms for 6 months. So the panel firm's trainee rotated into our brand legal team, and then I joined the firm's IP disputes team. That was a really good experience because it was related to IP, and it was also a contentious seat, so I was able to gain some contentious experience out of that. The timing of the swap worked out quite well as well, because I was joining the firm at the same time that the first seat trainees were coming into the firm. So I was able to join all of their induction sessions and get to know that cohort as well.
That's great. Thanks, Kieran. I'm just going to come back to you now, Matt, and come back to the topic of the final sign-off. Can you tell us how the final sign-off process works at Vodafone?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess it continues a little bit from the supervision of QWE point that I was making before. And knowing that we've had trainees in teams where they've had proper supervisor oversight with a focus on their development and the access to high quality work, alongside the fact they've had one-to-ones, team meetings, regular feedback, and so on, gives us and me confidence that the QWE that they've logged is accurate and reflects their experience. Also, although our candidates have been in the company for a while, and as Kieran said, he'd been in the company almost 2 years, that's before starting as a trainee, we have asked so far that QWE had been logged on a go-forward basis, as this will also make the validation and diligence more straightforward. And again, we've got a little more confidence again that they've been focusing on the competencies. Although that's not a prerequisite. If someone wanted to log previously obtained QWE, we would work through that as well. At the signing off point, I've so far acted as the signing off solicitor, and where I've not had direct supervision over the work that a candidate has done, trainee has done, I've liaised with the relevant supervisors to validate the QWE entries. Again, having had proper buy-in from these supervisors at the outset ensures that this request is also acknowledged, and there have been no moans or gripes so far when we've looped those people into the process. And this was also the case when asking Kieran's panel law firm Swap to review his QWE, and again they were thorough and diligent in their review. And to be honest, that's it. It's all been pretty painless. I suppose one tip I would give is maybe to make that QWE review quite regular. Don't leave it all to the end. Don't have this, well, both for the candidate and for the employer, don't have it all at the end so that it's hard to draft and it's a huge admin burden. But I think once submitted, I think it only took a few weeks, if that, for Kieran to have all his QWE and admin confirmed and qualified. So it was all pretty painless.
That's great. Thanks very much, Matt. We've had a question in which I'm going to put to you, Richard, before we move on, and you have covered this point, but I think it's worth just clarifying again. Somebody's asked whether they're required to sign off paralegals despite having a formal trainee programme, which that paralegal is not on. So can you just clarify that point for us?
Yes, absolutely, and it kind of goes back to I suppose kind of a couple of the key themes I talked about earlier. So, if a placement or a period within an organisation meets the criteria of qualifying work experience, so by that it engages some or all of the competencies, and it's the provision of legal services, and that there is evidence from the individual to suggest that they have met those criteria, then our expectation is that a solicitor or compliance officer for legal practice would sign that off as qualifying work experience. But I think the point I'd make on that is just to reiterate that in signing off qualifying work experience, they're not admitting them to the profession and not making any kind of judgments around their competence. An individual will still need to pass the SQE assessments.
Thanks for clarifying that, Richard. And just staying on the topic then of the sign-off, Sam, I'll come back to you. How does the final sign-off process work at Shoosmiths?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, really similar to Matt, we operate what we call a dual confirmed sign-off process internally. So for our trainee solicitors who are on the rotational programme, they're typically being signed off by our firm-wide training principal, and we're feeding information into the training principal to allow them to have that final sign-off. But then we have, of course, people who might be self-funding through the SQE and are requesting us as a business to sign them off, or the NQ Plus trainees who are supported and have done the majority of their training in one area. And so it is very similar for all of those people who want to get signed off, in that they are submitting their training records to the firm. That's through the internal platform that we use to record their competence and evidence throughout their QWE. So they should all have that ready to go, and that allows us to review that evidence of their time and their placement with us. And then the process in the background is that the supervising solicitor would receive the email from the SRA asking them to confirm the experience. So then we will have the conversation internally, either over email or in a conversation where we're bringing in a number of people from the business to input. So that would obviously be whoever the supervisor is for the placement time. We're also bringing in HR into that conversation to understand whether there's any additional character or suitability issues that we need to be aware of or let the SRA know about. And in emerging talent, we're part of that conversation as well as an overview point and to draw all of that information together, making sure that there were no issues, that the placement details are correct, like the evidence recorded is accurate, and essentially then we'll be advising the supervising solicitor and a more senior solicitor above them, and that's our dual process. So 2 people in a senior position to say yes, it's now okay to sign off this person and confirm their experience here, and we emerging talent and HR will then write to the individual to confirm that we're going ahead with that process. I think it's important that we have that dual confirming process internally, because we are a large firm, and as well as our kind of 30 rotational trainees, there can be lots of other people who are asking for confirmation throughout the year at the same time, and so I think it just adds that level, an extra level of compliance, and takes away some of the risk perhaps that our own supervisors might be wary of. Lots of the questions I can see coming in are around signing off, and do we have to sign somebody off, you know, if they're not on a proper program and things like that. So I think there is some hesitancy around that, and I think as an employer, part of our best practice guidance is making sure that our people are really aware of what their responsibility is. And as you said, Richard, right at the outset, it's not about saying, is this person a great trainee? Are they a great solicitor? That's what the SQE is actually for, assessing their ability, but we're just confirming the placement and the experience that they've had. So making that really clear to our supervisors and letting them know is an important part of the process. And I think where you can create your own guidance internally to support that messaging, then that's a great thing to do. It means you're not answering the same question again and again.
That's great. Thanks very much, Sam. And I'm going to continue on that theme before I come back to Kieran, because we've had a question in from somebody who said that they're aware of employers who don't want to sign people off because they're unfamiliar with the process, and they're asking Richard what sort of support does the SRA provide to employers who are not familiar with the sign-off process?
We offer quite a range of support, Maxine. So we have previous sessions like this that individuals can access online. We have specific resources on our website that are designed for organisations that are offering qualifying work experience to help them understand what is involved in, I suppose, offering really good qualifying work experience, as well as understanding what our expectations are around confirming qualifying work experience. So I would suggest that if anyone kind of wants any further information, they head to those resources as a first stop.
That's great. Thanks very much, Richard. So just to come back to you then, Kieran, an important part of the sign-off process is obviously having good records of the qualifying work experience that you've undertaken. So what sort of records did you keep when you were doing your QWE?
Yeah, so to keep my records, I used the Flex Legal platform, which is the same one that was being used by the Flex Legal trainees at Vodafone, the organisation that Matt mentioned earlier. So it's a digital platform which allows you to create journal entries covering a specific time period, and within those entries I would describe what I did, what I learnt, and the competencies that were met during that period. So when I started the logs, I took a very cautious approach and just wrote very extensive entries. When starting, I was also advised at the time to do weekly entries, so very much a very regular sort of logging process, and in conjunction with the level of detail that I was going to, it increasingly became actually quite tricky for me to balance logging the QWE with work and part-time study. But then as I developed an understanding of what the SRA was actually looking for out of the whole QWE logging process, I was able to refine my approach and made several sort of key changes to streamline the whole experience. So firstly, rather than weekly entries, I began to do them monthly, and in each entry I would limit the number of things that I would include. You don't need to talk about absolutely everything that you did, and when you are carrying out your work, you don't always learn something new from every task that you do, and that's fine for journaling purposes. In terms of the level of detail, I kept it more concise, because ultimately the main purpose of the logs is to give your signing off solicitor confidence that you have done the QWE which you're reporting on, and that you've gained experience in a broad range of competencies. And as long as your logs achieve that, you don't need to go overboard with the detail.
Thanks, Kieran. And Richard, we do have, and you've mentioned it already, I think, we do have a template training record, don't we?
We do. It's on our website. It's not mandatory to use it. I mean, I know others have mentioned other ways of recording their qualifying work experience, but I think kind of the key message that's coming out through kind of, I think, what Matt, Samantha and Kieran have said is, whatever you're using as a mechanism to log your qualifying work experience, try and do it as regularly as possible, and make sure that you're engaging with whoever is signing off or confirming your qualifying work experience to make sure that what you are recording is ultimately going to give them confidence to confirm your qualifying work experience.
And just to be clear, training records don't have to be sent to the SRA, do they? Absolutely not. We're, as part of the kind of admission process, no training records or any kind of evidence of qualifying work experience has to be sent by either the individual or the confirming solicitor. Thanks, Richard. So we do have a video on the SRA's website about recording and confirming QWE, because we know there's a lot of interest in it. So we thought it would be good to share that video with you today. It only takes a couple of minutes, so we're going to take a look at that video now.
Log into your MySRA account and go to Start a New Application. Search for the application or type in Notify. Select Notify us of your qualifying work experience. Once you are ready to start, click Record Work Experience. Please check all boxes to confirm you have read and understood each statement. Click Continue. Now provide the organisation details by searching for their name or SRA ID number. Select the organisation and click Continue. Now confirm the office you have worked at. Click Save and Continue. Now select the type of employment. Click Save and Continue. Fill in your start date, end date, and confirming if it was full-time, part-time, and how long it was for. Now click Save and Continue. Enter the solicitor's name or SRA number. This must be a solicitor of England and Wales. Now click Save and Continue. This is the summary page of your application. Now before you submit, you have the opportunity to edit each section, and when you're ready, click Save and Continue. Click I have read and understood the declaration, then click Submit. Your application has been submitted and a notification has been sent to the appointed solicitor. Once they have confirmed, you will receive an email notification confirming the results. When confirming qualifying work experience, you will receive an email asking you to log into your MySRA account and review the requests. Once you are in your MySRA account, you will be taken to the Actions page. You can also navigate to this page via the Actions tab within My SRA. Click on the relevant application and click Review the Requests. You will be asked to confirm a period of time for the applicant. Once ready, click View under Actions and read their application. Please also confirm any character and suitability issues, if any. Once you have read through the application and you're satisfied, click I have read and understood the declaration and click Confirm Period of QWE. Now that the application has been granted, the applicant will receive a notification confirming the results.
Hopefully you found that useful, and as I say, if you want to look at that again, it is on the SRA's website. So before we have a look at some more of the questions that have come in, I just got a couple of final questions for each of our speakers. Matt, let's go to you first. Can you tell us what's your top tip for other employers who want to provide a positive candidate experience during QWE?
So I would say it takes a little effort, but it's easy to run and it's well worth it. You're giving junior people an opportunity to progress. You're providing others with an opportunity to supervise and manage, and you're ensuring accessibility to the profession. So just ensure you get buy-in from the legal department as a whole, or at the very least, the teams that the trainees will support, because it's vital to ensure the quality of work, the supervision, and the quality of the development experience. And as I mentioned, this should give you much more confidence when it comes to the QWE signing off process. And just be mindful that working full-time and studying part-time is tough. So provide as much support as you can to accommodate this.
That's great. Thanks very much, Matt. And Sam, a slightly different question for you. What's your top tip for candidates in getting the best out of their qualifying work experience?
So I think this is about taking responsibility for your own career and driving forwards to reach a new level in terms of your own development. And I think as part of that, it's really important to be really open with your supervisor about, you know, your passion to progress, about any skills gaps that you want to improve, because then they'll have the ability to really give you a bespoke, you know, training path and make sure that you're meeting all of those requirements, not just from a regulatory point of view, not just to qualify, but of course for your ongoing development, which is for you as a person. And I think particularly for individuals who are choosing to self-fund the SQE and are not on a formal kind of pathway or route in the firm, it's really important that you're able to speak openly with your supervisor about that direction so that they can give you the required learning at a regulatory level, obviously, but also so like emerging talent can give you the appropriate support and resources that we would give to our own rotational trainees. And we also want to loop you in with existing junior talent within the business so that you can expand on those networks. So I think that there's a tendency for people who are perhaps self-funding and choosing to do the route alongside their job, as it may be, not to be that open about it, but I'd really encourage you to do so. And it allows the firm to identify opportunities that might be available for you when you qualify. Like we spoke earlier about the fact that just because you are you do qualify, you do become admitted, you gain your QWE and do the SQE, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be an NQ role for you at the end unless you're on one of the formal programs. And so but to make that the best opportunity for yourself, you've got to drive that forwards. You've got to have those conversations. You've got to make it known that that is your path and your desire. So just try and be open and drive it forward for yourself.
Thanks, Sam. And Kieran, now coming back to you, you've told us already that you were working full-time whilst you were studying part-time. So what's your top tip for anybody who's doing the same, working full-time and studying part-time?
Yeah, so anyone in a similar position as that, I would say really do communicate with your employer to ensure that they give you the space and the time that you need to focus on the study element. And I know that balancing work and study can be difficult. It will involve sacrifice, so giving up some evenings and some weekends. So it's important that you can maintain the discipline to be able to do that.
That's great. Thanks, Kieran. And final question for you, Kieran. Any top tips for employers?
So to employers, I would say that when you are seriously offering this opportunity to your employees, my top tip would be to really trust your trainees and delegate meaningful work to them by offering to support them on the QWE and SQE process. Then you obviously do see their potential. So do stretch them and give them real opportunities to grow as a trainee. As Matt's mentioned, some in-house teams, for example, may not have previously had a lot of experience with managing junior resource. So it's also a good opportunity for those teams to develop those management and delegation skills as well.
That's great. Thanks very much, Kieran. I'm just going to now turn to the questions that have come in and see quite a lot of them have been answered as we've gone through the session. But we have one here, Richard, I think it's probably one for you. Can the recording of qualifying work experience begin ahead of taking or completing the SQE exams?
Absolutely. You know, there's no a requirement that qualifying work experience is taken in particular order. So I think the general kind of top tip is, you know, if you are, as soon as you've completed a period of work experience, whether it is kind of as part of a formal program of say 2 years or as part of a smaller individual chunks, is to really get that qualifying work experience signed and logged and confirmed within our systems.
Thanks, Richard. And another one for you, I think, Richard, a question about what if a candidate's left their original employer and working development records are regarded as confidential?
Yeah, I suppose, you know, it goes back to that point I made earlier, really, is that I suppose our expectation is if someone is approached, they should take reasonable steps to try and confirm someone's qualifying work experience. Now, you know, what is being confirmed is, I suppose, is to some degree, I suppose, relatively kind of administrative, i.e. that they were employed by a particular organisation in a particular role for the period in which the individual is saying, and that they were kind of, I suppose, doing the role that they said that they were doing. So I mean, I'm not sure about the specifics of why would be confidential, but I mean, we do recognise as well that, you know, if there are barriers to stop someone really being able to confirm qualifying work experience, then that's acceptable too. You know, records for whatever reason may be confidential. Records, as I said, may not exist anymore. And if that's the case, I think it would be legitimate for a confirming solicitor to say, look, I've done my best here. I've tried to look at records, but I just can't confirm the things that you're asking me to confirm. So on that basis, I won't be able to.
Thanks, Richard. And another one here, I'm afraid for you again, Richard, it's about when a firm is requested to sign off retrospective qualifying work experience. And the question is, how many examples for each competency are required to satisfy that the candidate has attained the standard level?
I think it's a good question. We don't set sort of a limit or a kind of number of words or a number of examples on what evidence should be provided. I think, you know, the key message here is that, you know, try and kind of document as much as you can that sort of demonstrates how you met the competence you're claiming for, and that will then give the individual solicitor who's confirming your qualifying work experience, you know, confidence and visibility that the work that you have carried out has allowed you to be exposed to those competencies that you're suggesting that you or want to claim.
Thanks, Richard. And we've also had a question in here about what expectations does the SRA have for employers for ensuring a positive candidate experience for those employees that are not on the sort of traditional training pathway with the firm?
Yeah, and I think hopefully you've heard a lot of what I suppose kind of good qualifying work experience looks like from the other kind of panelists today. But I mean, kind of if we're looking at our expectations as a regulator, I think we're particularly for firms we regulate, we expect, you know, where possible for them to offer good quality work experience. And, you know, kind of Matt, Kieran and Samantha have explained to some degree what that might look like. We have got resources available on our website that goes into a lot more detail about that, but just to kind of summarize, I think the key ingredients of good qualifying work experience, you know, make sure that individuals carry out and are exposed to kind of a diverse range of work that enables them to be exposed to as many competencies as possible. The theme of kind of supports come through quite a lot here, so really support them in terms of thinking about kind of what work they're doing, whether you know, the work they're doing enables them to meet some of the competencies or whether there are any gaps. I think something we haven't quite talked about is as part of that broad range of work, I think kind of professionalism and ethics is really important as well. You know, kind of individuals should have exposure to that, to those types of kind of issues and scenarios. And then I think finally, it's really that kind of clarity around what happens after they qualify and what happens in terms of confirming qualifying work experience. So if you're kind of broadly doing all of those things, I think you're going to be meeting our expectation of offering good quality work experience.
That's great. Thanks, Richard. Matt, did you want to come in on that? Because I know that's something you've had experience of at Vodafone.
Yeah, I think it's on the employer. It's possibly also on the candidate as well to have that two-way conversation with their supervisor or with their employer to say, I've done a lot of this type of work. I'd actually quite like to do something else. And the way that QWE is logged by the candidate can actually help them work that out. If it's being done at a relatively regular cadence, and when you are logging it, you're so Kieran alluded to the Flex Legal QWE tool. With that, you are logging the competencies that you are acquiring when you've done some of your work and your work experience. So you could start to build a picture of, I've done a lot of this particular competency, and that would allow you then to have that conversation with your supervisor and say, actually, I'd quite like to do something different, or I'd like to do a stretch project over here, which will give me some exposure to some more contentious work or some advisory work. And yeah, with that drumbeat, I think, as Richard just said there, of kind of the ethical and professional standards throughout.
That's great. Thanks very much, Matt. I'm going to wrap things up there. I think it's been a really, really interesting discussion. I'd say I've probably got two top takeaways from today's session. One, that there's obviously lots and lots of different ways to gain qualifying work experience and to provide qualifying work experience from an employer's perspective, and all of these different ways are okay. And the second thing I think I'm taking away from this is about good communication between employers and candidates, and making sure that both parties understand what the other expects, because obviously this provides a positive experience for both the candidate and the employer. I want to say thanks very much to our speakers for their insights and experiences today. It's been really interesting to hear how qualifying work experience works in real life. If we haven't answered everyone's questions, then I can assure you we will look through them at the end of the session, and we'll see whether there are things that we can include in our information and resources or in future sessions. Please, as I said at the start, do take the time to fill out the feedback form it's in the link at the underneath this video. It's really, really important to us. We do want to know how the session went and what works well and what doesn't work as well. And we do look at them. I can assure you we do look at them. So please take the time to fill out the form. But as I say, I'm going to end it there and thank you very much.